Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Chaim Heron and Terry Kravosh in loving memory of Sergeant Elisheva Rose Lubin, Rose Elisheva Bat Chaim David and Nechama Rachel, great niece of their friends Eddie and Minda Snitkoff, who was murdered on Monday morning, November 6th in Jerusalem. May her short life and radiant and exuberant spirit be a memory and a source of strength to all those who loved her. Today's daf is sponsored by Yael Tzin to the Refuah Shlema of Oz Yeshua ben Talia Bat Zion and all those injured and for a safe return of all the hostages. Okay, we're going to get started. We have a bit of a long and complicated daf, so I will warn you. We're going to get into a lot of Nechasim Meshuabadim. If you remember, that means lien property. Okay, we're going to get there soon. We're starting with is this question that Rav Shmuel Bar Abba asked Rabbi Abba. I recommend also use the study guide. I'll actually use it some of today. I'll share screen, so if you're watching, you can follow along. Shmuel Bar Abba asked this question of Rabbi Abba, and he said, when we talk about Idit, the best of the land, do we mean the best, according to Rabbi Akiva, who said the best of the land of the person who caused damage? Is that the best of their land, no matter how good their land is? Even if it's super good, better than the rest of the world, they still have to pay with the best? Or does it just mean best compared to the rest of the world? And we already discussed the different conceptual framework there. I'm not going to go into that right now. So Rabbi Abba answered by saying, of course, it's the best of the damage, the one who damaged. Of course, it's the best of his land. It doesn't matter whether it's superb and way above normal, because it says Metav Sadehu, and that seems pretty clear. Well, comes Rav Shmuel Bar Abba, who asked the question and throws a question back at him from a braita. Eitive. Elo Elid. We're now going to have a whole list, and it's pretty straightforward. This case, what happens if the person has only Idit land or only Ziburi land? Okay, the basic premise of this again is if you're someone who got damaged, you get to collect from the best land. If you're someone who loaned money and they owe you money, then you're going to collect from the average. And if you're a woman trying to get her ketuba money, you're going to get from the worst. Do you remember why this is? This is because we want to make sure that men are willing to marry women, and we want to tell them, don't worry, yes, you have to commit her all this money, but she's only going to take it from the lower quality land. So now they say in this braita, Elo Elid, what if the person only had Idit, the best land? Kulam govim min Idit. Of course, they're all going to only collect from that. You can't say, oh, sorry, I don't have poor land, so you can't collect your money. Of course, you could collect your money from the best land. Beinoni, kulam govim beinoni. If everything was average, so everybody gets for the average, meaning even if you have damaged, you were damaged by the person and you're supposed to get the best, well, they don't have the best, you're going to get beinoni. Ziburi, kulam govim ziburi, right? If it's the worst, everyone will get the worst. Hayulo idit ubenoni v'ziburi. What if he had all three? Well, then obviously, nizakin beidit, the damaged people get idit. The baal chov, the creditor, gets benoni. Ketuba v'ziburi. That's the basic law. Now we start to get into more complicated ones. Idit ubenoni. What if you had best and average? Nizakin beidit. So obviously, again, the damage will get idit. The baal chov uktuba benoni. So the one owed money and the ketuba of a woman will get the benoni. Okay, because he doesn't have ziburi. Benoni v'ziburi, okay, this is the case that's going to eventually be the one that we're going to raise a difficulty with, but we'll get to that soon. If you have average quality land and poor quality land, so the nizakin will obviously get from the benoni. What about the baal chov? Well, he'll also get from benoni, which seems pretty logical, because baal chov and creditor is supposed to get benoni, and you have benoni, so great. And ketuba b'ziburi, and since you have ziburi land, so the ketuba will be from the ziburi. Idit v'ziburi nizakim be'idit u'bal chov ketuba b'ziburi. If you have only the best land and the worst land, okay, we're giving all the possible permutations. Nizakim get the idit. Now here you get something we didn't get before, which is a bal chov. He doesn't get to go up a level; he goes down a level. Okay, you don't get to collect more than what you're deserving of. You go down if we don't have your type. So the bal chov and the ketuba nisha will get ziburi. But now we're going back to this line. Katani miyat mitzia. In the middle case, they said that what? It wasn't really the middle case, okay? They just mean it wasn't the last case, okay? Now I'm pulling it up to share screen so you can follow here. It says, Benonit v'ziburit, nizakinu ba'alchov b'benonit, uktubat isha b'ziburit. It was the second to last line, okay? So if you have benoni and ziburit, if you got damaged or you were a creditor, you're going to get from the benoni. Now, and the ketubat isha, obviously, you're going to get the ziburit. Now, they say the following. Rav Shmuel Bar Abba says to Rabbi Abba, who answered, it obviously goes based on the mazik's property. Well, if the mazik has benonit and ziburit, and that's all the mazik has, and it's all relative to what he owns, then his Benoni theoretically is Idit, is his best land, because it's all relative. So what does it mean relative? It means your average land, if it's average to the rest of the world, but it's your best land, then we should call it Idit. Okay. In other words, you can't take it only in one way and say, if you have superb land, we're going to call it Idit. But if you have Benoni land and that's the best that you have, we're going to call it Benoni. No, your Benoni becomes Idit. And that's why I crossed them out here. Your Benoni is like Idit and your Ziburit is like Benoni. So the case of Benoni v'Ziburit should really be like Idit u'Benoni, which means your best land, right, which is the Benoni, your average land, actually should only go to the damaged person. And your Ziburit land, which now becomes, because relatively speaking, it's your Benoni land, it's your average land, should go to the Baal Chova. That's not what the braita says. So let's read that inside. Iyamar b'shalohem shamim ta'aseh Benoni shelo ki Idit. His Benoni becomes Idit. V'yidache Baal Chova etzel Ziburit, and Baal Chov should go down and drop down and collect from the Ziburit, which now is considered Benoni. So that's the big problem. To which they answer, Hacha b'maya skinan. Oh, you just didn't understand the case. Yes, we said it's a case where you had only Benoni and Ziburit, but actually when you took out the loan, when the person took out the loan, they had Idit, Benoni, and Ziburit. They had all three types. And that means now when does your land get lien to the loan? At the moment you take out the loan. So if I took out a loan, okay, or maybe we'll use this example and we'll keep going with these names. Ruth takes out a loan, okay? Ruth takes a loan, and her loan is, she has all three properties at the time, Idit, Benoni, and Ziburit. And then a few months later, the loan comes up. In between the time that she's supposed to pay back the loan, she sells her Idit property. She sells her best property. So right now, she has only Benoni and Ziburit. However, her Benoni maybe now is considered Idit, but it doesn't matter. Because the moment the loan happened, the loan was already what we call mishuabad. Okay, this Benoni land was already lien to this loan, this middle land. So even though now it might be Idit, it doesn't matter. If she took out a loan today, then her loan wouldn't be lien to her average land, we call it, which is really now her best land, wouldn't be lien to the loan. But because at the time of the loan she had Idit and then later sold it, and that's why she's only left with these two. That's why the Baal Chov gets from the Benoni. Okay, that's the basic claim. Rav Chisda also said, he explained this case in the braita in the same way we just did. Now the Gemara wants to do a hachinami mistaber, which means we're going to further prove that this must have been the case. And the way they're going to do it, you can see from this next chart, is they're going to bring a contradiction between our braita, the one we just said, and a different braita, where the law is the opposite. Instead of getting the Baal Chov b'Benoni in this case, the Baal Chov is going to get from the Ziburit. And they're going to say how else to resolve the contradiction, but by saying one is where there was Idit, she had Idit in the beginning, and one was where she didn't have Idit in the beginning. And that's going to be their answer, which is then going to further prove what we just said, that really b'shalohem shamin. And this just doesn't create a problem because even though the Benoni should be Idit, it doesn't matter in this case because there was Idit to begin with. And when the Benoni is your best land at the time of the loan, then that's going to become Idit, and the Baal Chov is only going to get from the Ziburit. And that's going to be the first resolution to the contradiction that's going to basically support what Rabbi Abba said in the first place. Again, Rav Shmuel bar Abba asked Rabbi Abba, is it relative to the Mazi or is it relative to the world? And he said it's relative to the Mazi, to which they brought this question from the braita, and then they resolved it by saying it wasn't this case where there was only Benoni and Ziburit. It was a case where there was Idit also, Benoni and Ziburit, just the Idit is no longer here. That's why I made an X through it, because he sold the Idit. Okay, but at the time of the loan, there were three properties. So now we're going to do that, and we're going to basically take this contradiction, resolve it in that way, and say perfect. The problem is going to be, though, they're going to bring three other resolutions to this contradiction, which are not going to be able to then prove b'shalohem shamin. Okay, and then that's what we're going to go after that. But right now, we want to prove it from this contradiction between the two braita. And then, like I said, we're going to have three other resolutions to the contradiction, which are either going to have nothing to do with this or actually going to prove the opposite or maybe be inconclusive. Okay, we'll see. So, midikatani achrite. Well, it says in a different braita, Benonit v'Ziburit, nizakim v'Benonit, and Baal Chov v'ktubah isha v'Ziburit. So again, very simply, it's the exact same case in the braita that we had. You have two types of property, Benoni, average, and poor land. And instead of saying in our braita that the Baal Chov gets from the average, Here it says the Baal Chov gets from the Ziburi, to which they say, Kasha Nahadadi. These two sources contradict each other. And therefore, they assume Elalav Shmamina must be the braita. We're talking about different situations. Kan Shaitalu Ididu Mechara, Kan Shelo Haitalu Ididu Mechara. Right? The first case, he had Edit land originally and sold it. But since at the time of the loan, he had the Edit, the loan was lien to, that land was lien to the loan, in which case later when they come to collect and there's only Benoni, there's no more Edit, it doesn't matter because he can collect from the Benoni because it was already lien to this loan. Whereas the second option, the second case where it says he gets from the Ziburi is Shelo Haitalu Edit Umechara. The person who took the loan, Ruth never had the loan, and therefore she never had Edit. And therefore her Benoni was Edit, and which was the one that was lien to the loan then? The Ziburi, which became Benoni. Because it's all relative. And then that proves our point, Rabbi Abba's point, that it's all relative to the person whose property it is. All relative. Not compared to the rest of the world. Compared to the rest of the world, the Benoni is Benoni, the Ziburi is Ziburi, and then we would always collect from the Benoni. But Ibayit Ema, second option. And here you can see from the chart that according to this option, we're actually going to come to the opposite conclusion. If we resolve the contradiction in this way that we're going to, the conclusion in terms of his bishalo or bishalolam is going to be the reverse. It's going to be, it's obvious we compare this to the rest of the world. So now, okay, so now we're going to assume, basically to reject the first resolution, it's really a case where there was just Benoni and Ziburi, they never had Edit property. Now, how do you resolve then? If they never had other property, then theoretically, if you're going to say it's all based on the person themselves, well, then you should collect from the Benoni. And if it's all from the rest of you should collect from the Ziburi. If it's all from the rest of the world, then you should collect from the Benoni. So how are they going to resolve this? V'lo kashya, ha deshavia Benonit shelo ki idita alma, v'kan delo shavia Benonit shelo ki idita alma. They're going to say each braita is referring to a different situation. One is the Benoni that belonged to this person was equal to the Edit of the rest of the world. And the second case, and that's the first case, because if you're Benoni, right? So now it's not relative. Now we're going to say the Benoni is like Edit, not because it's your best, but because your average land was equal to the Edit of the rest of the world. Now, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. That's the second braita, my mistake. Let's go back. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. In the first case, when you actually collect from the Benoni, and that was the whole problem, doesn't your Benoni become Edit and your Zibur become Benoni? No. In the first case, it's not relative to your property, and therefore your Benoni doesn't become Edit. And actually, your Benoni wasn't equal to the best of the rest of the world, meaning, very simply, your Benoni was Benoni by the world standards, and your Ziburi was Ziburi according to your world standards. And that's why the Baal Chov collects from the Benoni, because it was Benoni by all standards, okay? By the world standards. And that's what's important. And again, we're going to come to the conclusion according to this explanation. Again, these are all possible resolutions of the contradiction. We don't know how to resolve the contradiction. These are just all different possibilities, which then prove that you can't use this contradiction and the resolution to the contradiction to prove your point about Bishalo, because you could prove the exact opposite. The second braita, which says you only get from the Ziburi, is because in this case, your Benoni was Shavya ki Edit shel kol haolam. Your Benoni is actually equal in value to the rest of the world, the best of the rest of the world. And your Ziburi was like Benoni. And that's why, if we're going to go by the rest of the world, that's why the Baal Chov, the creditor, is going to be able to collect from your Ziburi to not your Benoni, because your Benoni is actually not Benoni, it's actually top quality land. Now, what's the problem? The problem with this is, if your Benoni is Edit of the rest of the world, then why do we call it, if you have two pieces of land, one is Benoni, one is Ziburi, and your Benoni is like the Edit of the world, and your Ziburi is like the Benoni, then why do they call it Benoni and Ziburi? Why don't they call it Edit and Benoni, right? It doesn't make any sense. So some of the commentaries explain that what happened here is you actually have three pieces of land. You have Edit, right? For you, they're relatively Edit, Ziburi, Benoni and Ziburi, but your Benoni is like Edit of the world, which means your Edit is way higher. It's like we talked about yesterday. It's superb. It's way higher. Now, what did we learn? If you're going to say that it goes by the world, then you don't have to pay that land. And that's why they just didn't even relate to that in the braita. They were relating to a case where you had land that could be collected that was in the range of ziburit to edit. It happens you didn't have anything that was ziburit. You only had average quality land and high quality land, and then you had super high quality land. Since you had super high quality land, for you that was edit. Your great land, which is really from the world's perspective is edit, but compared to your land, it's actually Benoni. And your ziburit, which is actually average land compared to your other two plots, is called ziburit. And that's why we said Benoni and ziburit. So in the second braita, you're going to have to say there was a third piece of land. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Because if you only had two, and your Benoni, and we call them Benoni and ziburit, and your Benoni and ziburit are actually edit and Benoni compared to the rest of the world, then we should have just called it edit and Benoni. So you'd have to say that he had superb land, and that's what we were talking about here. Okay, that's a little bit complicated, but the main point here, again, is if you pull up the chart, you will see that in this interpretation, this means it all goes by the rest of the world, okay? It has nothing to do with what your land is valued compared to yourself, okay? So if your Benoni is actually Benoni by regular standards, then they'll collect from Benoni. But if your Benoni is edit, then the creditor is only going to be able to collect from your ziburit land, because your ziburit land is basically considered Benoni. Okay, so now we have two ways to resolve the contradiction. One proves that it goes relative to you, and the other one says it goes relative to the world. Third explanation. Your Benoni is really actually average. And then the question is, now you only had two though. So if you only have Benoni and ziburit, and your Benoni is average, well, if you compare it to the rest of the world, so it's Benoni, which means you're going to get Benoni, right? The creditor is going to be able to take your Benoni land. But if we say it's relative to yourself, then your Benoni becomes your best quality, and your ziburit becomes your average quality, and then the Baal Chov is only going to be able to collect from the bad quality land that you have, because your bad quality is considered average by standards of the world. So now they're going to say the following. The machloket is this. And now we're going to say the machloket is exactly the question that Rav Shmuel Rabba is asking. Mar savar b'shelohem shami. The one who says we're going to compare it relative to yourself is going to say that the ziburit becomes Benoni. So here, that's why I X'd out the ziburit. The ziburit is now the new Benoni, because for you, it's Benoni. So that's why the second braita says you're going to collect from ziburit, because they say it's all relative to yourself. And Mar Saval, the first braita says, B'shel olam hem shami. It's all relative to the world. So your Benoni might be your best land, but it's actually average land for everybody else. And therefore, this first braita and the second braita, forget the first two options, say they agree. They were just talking about different situations. Here they're saying we're talking about the exact same situation. It's just a machloket, what you hold in this area. So now I just want to review that according to all three interpretations, the resolution to this contradiction has something to do with this machloket of b'shelo or b'shel olam. It's just a matter of, does it prove b'shelo? Does it prove b'shel olam? Or do these two braitot have the exact same machloket that we're having between Rav Shmuel Bar Abba and Rabbi Abba? Again, it wasn't necessarily machloket. It was just Rabbi Shmuel Bar Abba asked the question. Rabbi Abba answered, and then Rav Shmuel said, but that doesn't make sense compared to the source. So we started questioning. The fourth interpretation is going to have absolutely nothing to do with the b'shelo or b'shel olam. The fourth resolution is something entirely different. Ravina Amar b'de'ula pli. Here, there's really a machloket about what Ula said. Now, this is something we mentioned yesterday, but now we're going to see it more inside. Dvar Torah Baal Chov b'ziburit. Really, a Baal Chov is only supposed to collect ziburit. Now, Shneimar b'chutz ta'amod va'isha asher tanoshebo yotzi elecha et ha'avot hachutz. Now, the way this works is, Torah says, if you take a loan, the lender is supposed to wait outside the house, and when the person who borrows the money, the borrower, is supposed to bring you a collateral, let them choose what collateral they're going to give you. In other words, don't go into the person's house and say, hey, I'm taking your fancy watch, and that's going to be collateral for the loan. But no, you actually have to wait outside and they'll bring it to you. Now, the theory goes like this. Ula says, now, what do you think he's going to bring out? If you go in, you're going to take his fanciest watch. If he gives something to you, he's going to give you his cheapest watch, right? Obviously, it's going to have to be something of value, but he's going to give you something he doesn't care so much about. The lowest of the kelim, which is like the ziburit, right? So that means from here, now this assumes, it's a big machloket about how do you assume what a collateral is. Is a collateral just an insurance policy? Or is a collateral meant that if you don't pay back the loan, they're just going to keep it? So according to this, it sounds like a collateral is meant as a payback of the loan, like almost like you're paying it back immediately, even though you're not. But this is there to insure, but more than insure. It's really that we can take this as payment. So if this can be taken as payment, and this is ziburit, because they can take out to you the worst that they want, it sounds like really by Torah law, it's only ziburit. And then, so why they say benoni? But then no one would ever want to lend money if they're going to get paid by the worst of the land, and then we won't have people lending money. So that's why they upped it to benoni. So now the one who says the Baal Chov b'Beinonit holds like Ula. And Mar eat le takanta de Ula. Mar le takanta Ula. And the second one says, no, we don't have this takana of Ula. Okay, now there's a big debate about how to understand this. Does he mean we don't hold this at all? And the Baal Chov only gets ziburit, and that's the Tanaitic opinion. It's possible. Or maybe he means in a bit more of a unique situation, like we were discussing, but I'm not going to, where it's valued differently, but I'm not going to get into that right now because we have a lot of complicated stuff coming up right now. So I'll just put it out there as a question. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. So again, there were 4 resolutions to this contradiction. Okay, but the point of the resolutions was to say that you can't prove from here what Rabbi Abba said, that Michelle. Okay, that it all was relative to him. Because even though that was one way to resolve the contradiction, there were 3 alternative ways to resolve it, some which actually led to the opposite conclusion or led to the fact that there's machloket or had absolutely nothing to do with this machloket at all. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get to a Tosefta. There's 2 basic, the Tosefta is going to split into 2. We have machar le'echad or l'shlosha b'nei adam. You sold to 1 person or to 3 people. Te'echad, meaning all in one day. So you had 3 different properties, Idi, Benoni, and Ziburit, and you sold them all on the same day, either to 1 person or to 3 people. Now, it's actually confusing, and this is going to be the question. It says machar le'echad, stop. Then it says or to 3 people on one day. That's what it means, ke'echad. Now, the question is going to be, when it says when you sold to 1 person, is it all on the same day, or could it even be on subsequent days? We'll get to that. So I want to be clear about how I'm reading this, because I kind of read it the other way, and I want to make sure, no. Machar le'echad is one case, and then or 3 people all on the same day. We don't know about the echad. Is it all on the same day, or is it on different days? We'll see that soon. Because the second part is going to be if you sold to 3 people, one after the other. So the question is the din of 1 person on one day or 1 person on every day, or subsequent days, which is it more similar to? Anyway, let's just go with you sell to 1 person. We don't know yet how, you sold them all 3 on one day or subsequent days, or you sold to 3 people all on one day. The one who bought the ziburit, okay, let's go with the 3 people. The one who bought the ziburit is the one you're going to collect your ketuba from. The one who bought the best, the damaged person's going to collect from. The one who bought, right? So this is, again, let's talk about characters. We have Ruth. Ruth sells to Naomi her land, 3 plots of land, or she sells to Naomi, Yael, and Tamar, one after the other, all on the same day, 3 plots of land. Okay, she has an Idi to Benoni to Zibur. Whatever, now, when Ruth had all these lands in her property, if, a Nizak would have come, he would have collected from the best. If the ketuba isha, a woman collecting her ketuba, she would have collected from the worst, etc. So now that she sold these all on the same day, we basically, it's like she transferred all those liens to, so the one who she damaged is going to collect it from the one who got the best land. The one who, okay, it's just going to go exactly as it was before. If she sold them all to Naomi, then again, when you go to collect, you're going to collect the best from the damages from the best, the ketuba from the worst, the creditor from the middle. Okay, and likewise, if you sold to 3 different people on the same day, it's just going to go like that. That's a simple law. Okay, so everything goes with the lien that was connected to it. But if on Sunday she sold to Naomi, on Monday she sold to Yael, and on Tuesday she sold to Tamar, kulam govim min ha'acharon. It doesn't matter what Tamar ended up with. She's the last one. She's the first one they're going to collect from. Why? Because basically, if you go to Naomi and say, hey, give me whatever it is, okay, Naomi will say, hey, you can't collect from me. Let's say she sold Naomi the best. And then that was the first collection. Now you have to remember the way this works. Ruth owes money. Let's say she damaged someone. She owes money. Theoretically, they should get from the ED, the best, but she sold it to Naomi. At the time, she still had 2 plots of land. She had an average and a ziburit. Now, at the moment that, let's assume Leah is the one who got damaged, Leah goes to collect from Ruth. Ruth says to collect from Naomi, I want that best land that you bought from Ruth. Well, Naomi could say, what are you talking about? Ruth has land still. You can't collect from me unless Ruth has no more land. That's the rule. You can't collect, we'll see it later in the Gemara, from nechasim shu'abadim, from lien property, if there's b'nei chorin, if there's free property. So Ruth, if you're talking about day 1 on Sunday, she sold to Naomi, and comes Leah to collect, there's still land in Ruth's house. Now, if she comes on Monday, so still there's 1 plot left with Ruth. So both Ruth and both Naomi and Yael can say, hey, go to Ruth. So when she sells on day 3, the last property to Tamar, and then on day 4, Leah comes and goes to Naomi, who bought the best land, and says, hey, listen, give me the best land. I'm an Isaac. She says, what are you talking about? When I bought this, Ruth still had land to pay you back. So you got to go to the last person who bought from her. The last free property that was in Ruth's hands, that's where you get from. Irregardless of whether it's Ziburit or Benonit or whatever it is, you're going to get from the last person. Ain lo, what if the property that's in Tamar's possession is not enough to cover the amount? So go v'mishilifanav. So you go to the one before her, to Yael. Ain lo, only if that's not enough, go v'shilifnei panav. Then you're going to go to Naomi. But basically, the amount of the loan or whatever it was could be covered by person number 3 who bought, or person number 3 plus person number 2. Then person number 1 is off the hook, because her claim is, at the time I bought it, right? You could have paid it. Ruth could have paid it back from other properties. So, I went out because I bought first. Naomi says, okay, that's the basic idea. So now comes the big question: what's the case of selling it to one person? What's the case? Is it that you sold them to all in the same day? Just like the 3 people that were sold to all in the same day, right? All in the same day, we say that whole second claim doesn't work, because once it's all in the same day, it's irregardless of the order. Even though in one day the order is different, but in the end, we don't usually put an hour on the shtar. It's all like it was sold at once. So now, even though with 3, theoretically, you could have said still, Naomi bought first on that day, Yael bought second, Tamar bought third, and theoretically you could have said there was an order, and that would be relevant. Naomi could say, no, take it from the last person, and yet Amart Kulam Nichnesu Tachat Abalim, and yet we don't say that. So Mecharan Le'achad Mebaya, all the more so, it would be obvious. If you sold it to one person, of course, he can't claim, well, I bought this one first, I bought that one second, I bought that one third, all on the same day. So therefore, so you would not even need to tell us that case. So therefore, the fact that they mentioned Mecharan Le'achad must be through selling to 3 people was one after the other. Okay, so I'm sorry, selling to one person was that you sold. Okay, so now we're going to just have Ruth and Naomi. Ruth sells to Naomi 3 plots, one on Sunday, one on Monday, one on Tuesday. And then we're going to say, in that case, since we don't care that it was a different order, okay, they happened on different days. Basically, whoever is deserving of the best is going to get the best, right? If Leah is deserving of the best land, she's going to take the best land from her. If she's deserving of the middle, she's going to take the middle. Now, this is going to be something that's going to be very complicated to figure out. So the Gemara is going to say, I don't get it, though. Just like Naomi can come in the case with the 3 people that bought on separate days and say, hey, when I bought this, I left you with other property. So theoretically, if Naomi first bought the Edid, and then the next day this is the Benonit, and the next day the Ziburit, when they come to collect the Edid, she could say, what are you talking about? When I bought that on Sunday, I left Ruth with other land. And really, you only get the last land that Ruth had, which was the Ziburit, and therefore you can't collect from me the best of my land. Take the worst. Okay? Now, to which they say, so how can we possibly explain this case? It must be that the Edit was the last one sold. And that's why they can claim the Edi land, okay, because it was the last one bought. Okay, we're going to have to explain this later, but we'll stick with it right now. We understand it basically right now. In other words, it would only be in a case if the Edi was last, then the Nizakin can claim from the Edi. Okay, because again, if that was the one you left, then that's the one that has first dibs to collect from. But the Gemara says, and that doesn't make any sense, because what was the law in the first case? Let's just look again at the Tosefta. The Tosefta said, this is a very complicated sugya. I'm just warning you, okay, if you haven't figured that out. So in the case of Machar La'echad, what did we say? Kulam nechnesu tachad ha'ba'alim. So if you come to get a ketuba, it'll be ziburit. If you come to Rabal Chov, you'll get the benuri. Nizakin, you'll get the Edi. If we say that Naomi bought on Sunday the ziburit, on Monday the benoni, and on Tuesday the Edi, which is what the Gemara just said, then theoretically, when someone goes to get a ketubat isha, they should be able to collect it from the best, because what was our whole theory? Whatever was left last is the one you can collect from, right? So therefore, it doesn't make any sense. So they say, if you're going to say that's the case, well, then we have a problem. They should all be collected from the Edi, and that's not what the Tosefta said. The Tosefta said everyone gets the land that fits their thing. So they answer the following: Mishum de'amar lehu, and this answer we're going to suggest and then reject it. Naomi can say to them the following. She has like a smart argument to give back to Leah. When Leah comes and wants to collect them all from the Edi, what can she say? Ishatiku v'shakiltu kidinaichu shakiltu. Let's say they're going for the ketubat isha, for the Baal Chov, let's say. No, let's go with the ketubat isha. And they want to take from the Edi. She said, no, sorry. Baal Chov is the better example. There's a creditor. Leah is owed money by Ruth for a loan, and she goes to collect the money from Naomi. And she says, the last plot you bought on Tuesday was the Edi. Great, I get the Edi, because that was the last thing you left in Ruth, and therefore you're coming in place of Ruth. I get that. Well, now we could say the following. You want to get the best land instead of the Benoni land? If you're going to just be, shut your mouth and take from the best, great. But if you're going to make an issue, take from the average. But if you're going to make an issue and try to take from the best, I have a better solution. What will I do to mess you up? I'll just return a ziburit land, the ziburit land I bought, to Ruth. And if I return it to her, you'll only be able to collect from the ziburit, because at that point Ruth will have land. Once Ruth has land, you can't come to me. So I'll just return her that land, and then you'll take it from the ziburit, and then you'll get messed up. So therefore, don't start bothering me about trying to collect your loan from the best land, because I'll just mess you up and you'll have to get it from the ziburit. To which the Gemara says that still doesn't really work with the braita. Why not? Ihachi, turning out I'm a bit. Benizakin nami nemahachi. In terms of damaged people, you could also say the same, because what happens? Do you remember what we learned at the beginning of the daf? If Ruth only has ziburit, then Leah can only collect damages from ziburit, because that's all she has. Now, what was the halacha in our braita? If you sell to one person, even day after day, what will happen? You'll be able to collect nizakim from the best. But if Naomi has this solution, she can use the solution even for the Edi, for a damage. If Leah was damaged by Ruth, she can say the exact same thing. She can say, listen, I'm giving you only ziburit, because anyway, I can give you, I can mess you up. I can just return the ziburit land to Ruth, and then you can't collect from me at all. You're going to get the ziburit from Ruth. So therefore, theoretically, she should only have to pay everything from the ziburit, because she can always just return the land to Ruth. So that's not the law in the Tosefta. So therefore, this doesn't make much sense. There must be a case, and here they're going to try to say, this is why you can't, we're going to come up with a case where that solution is not an option for Naomi to return the land to Ruth, because even if she did, it wouldn't be relevant. And we're going to see why in a minute. We must be talking about orphans. Now, orphans, there's a unique law about orphans. The way it works is, if Ruth was an orphan, and when her father died, he left this property to Ruth and also left the loan. So the three properties were hers, and he had a loan out. So the person who borrowed, like Leah, who had this loan out, right? Leah was owed money. She was a creditor. She loaned money to Ruth's father. She could collect it from all those properties. She's held it to Naomi. Again, Leah can still collect from Naomi. But if Naomi says, I'm going to return the plot to Ruth, when Naomi returns the plot, actually, the orphans don't have to pay from that. It's not lien to the loan, because the way it works is, if an orphan, let's say, didn't get any land from the father, then their creditors don't get paid back. Only land is liened from a father's loan to the orphans, and only land once that they sell. But if they buy it, so if Naomi returns the property, she's really selling it back to Ruth. And if Ruth is an orphan who buys property after the father's dead, that is not liened to the loan. So even though this property was liened in the beginning, when they would get it back in this solution that Naomi has come up with in a very smart manner, well, it's not going to work, because it actually is no longer liened to the loan. So it wouldn't help Naomi, that claim, in a case of orphans. So now, where are we? Again, let's just review. We tried to say, what is mecharan la'achir? We suggested it was bezeh achar zeh. It was one person, 3 subsequent days. Still, everyone's going to get from whatever land they normally would have gotten from originally, to which we said it doesn't make any sense. So they then said, well, it must be the Edit was the last one. And then they said, well, the Edit being the last one, they could all collect from the Edit, to which they said, no, because it's this case where Naomi has a good out. But then they said, no, that doesn't work, that answer, because we're going to explain a case where it's not going to work, like by orphans. So that knocks out that answer. So now we're going to go back to a different answer to the question of why can't they all collect from the best of the land? So now, in other words, theoretically, if it was orphans, they really could all collect from the best land and say, listen, Naomi, you bought from Ruth. The last thing you bought from Ruth was the Edit. We get the Edit, and she can't say, I'll just return the Ziburit, because it won't help them, because that Ziburit will not be liened to the loan. Okay, now, Ella, they say the following. Okay, so let's just read about the atonement. I don't think I read this whole thing. So you can't collect from land that the orphans purchase later. And this returning land of Naomi would be basically repurchased land. So now the shibuda wouldn't be on that anymore. And therefore you can't say that. So Ella mishum amar lahu. Now, I know this has been very complicated. This is actually very straightforward. The concept of, okay, which means, what's the concept that you can't collect from Naomi if Ruth still has land, right? If she sells Naomi one plot, whatever Ruth is left, it doesn't matter what quality, anyone Leah, who's owed money, right, who's owed money from Ruth, is going to only be able to collect from Ruth. And then likewise, right, in that order, if she first sells to Naomi, and then she sells to Yael, and then she sells to Tamar, right? Naomi could say, well, you still had land, so don't collect from me. And Yael could say, well, when I bought it, Ruth still had land, so don't collect from me. And only Tamar is left. She's the one who's stuck because she bought last. Well, that's all mishum takanta didi. That's all to protect the buyer. It's to protect the first buyer, right? Naomi bought, and we want to protect her. Ruth still had land, so great, we're protecting Naomi from that. Ella. But here, Ana Bahata Kanta Lo Michale. If Naomi bought all 3 plots, now we go back to the fact that we're saying the case is where she bought Edit at the end. We want to understand why in a case where one person bought 3 plots one day after the other, we're not going to collect from the last one. Usually you collect from the last one to protect the buyer. Well, if Naomi bought the Edit last, it's not in her best interest to have you collect from the last property first, right? Because then you'll collect from the Edit for a ketuba of a woman, which for sure you shouldn't be doing. So Naomi's going to say, listen, the whole purpose, again, Naomi's very smart in this whole thing of what they're putting in her mouth anyway. The whole purpose of taking from the last one was to protect the buyer, right? To protect the first buyer, to protect the second buyer. But in this case, I'm the only buyer. And it's actually worse for me. If I bought the Edit last, I'm going to be messed up. So I don't really want this takana. This takana doesn't work for me and I don't want it. And you can do this. How do we know this? Raba, as Raba said. Raba said, Raba said, anyone who says, it's very nice the rabbis did this to protect me, but this doesn't protect me, so I'm not interested in this takana. So they can do that. So therefore, if it's 3 people, obviously, Naomi wanted the protection that, go get it from Yael, and Yael wanted the protection, go get it from Tamar. But in the case where it's one person who bought 3 plots of land one day after the other, and they happen to have bought the Edit last, it's way worse for them if you say collect from the last. And therefore they say thanks, but no thanks. Now, What Rava said was, anyone who says, I don't want a takana of the rabbis like this. Now, what's like this? The Gemara wants to know, Maika gonzo, kid Rav Huna, and this is something we learned in Seder Nashim, the Amar Rav Huna, Yechola Isha shetomar leba'ala, eini nizona ve'eini osa. If you remember, we saw this in Ketubot and some other places as well. The deal between a husband and wife is, the husband, part of the ketuba commitment is, all her proceeds go to the husband, and in exchange, the husband gives her food. If she says, listen, I don't want your food, I'm happy to work for myself and keep my own salary, she's allowed to do that. So that's a case where the Chachamim instituted this to help the woman. But if the woman doesn't want it, she's allowed to say, I don't want it. Likewise, this finally explains the case, again, this was all to explain the case of one person in the Tosefta, where they assumed the case of one person was, even if they bought on subsequent days. Why isn't it the same as the three people? Because in a case where they bought the Edit last, it's in their best interest not to have this takana. And we allow them to basically say, I don't want the takana. Okay, so that was a very complicated way to just get to that simple or kind of simple answer. Okay, now we're going to go into some other situations relating to this Tosefta. Pshita, now we're going to get a little more complicated. Ruth sold to Naomi 3 plots of land. Okay, Ruth sold to Naomi to one person, all 3 plots of land. Okay, so Naomi buys 3 plots. Now she sells the plot to Yael. Okay, Naomi sells it, not Ruth, but Naomi. Naomi bought all 3 and now starts selling them to someone else. Machar lokech benonit v'ziburit. So she sells her the benonit and the ziburit. V'shiur idit lefanav, and she kept the idit for herself. Leitukulu ligbu mi'idit. And so now everyone can collect from the idit, because what was the case? We already said she bought the idit last. Now, if she buys the idit last and she no longer has benonit and ziburit, then she can't make that claim of, well, it's not in my best interest to go by the last one I bought, because she already sold the rest of them. So, daha achronahi, because that was the last one she bought. And she doesn't have the others anymore. She sold them. So therefore, since it was the last one and the others aren't in her possession anymore, then she no longer has that claim. Ubenonit v'ziburit litnehu gabe dematze lememar lehu gvumi benonit v'ziburit deloni chale b'takanata de Rabbanan, right? And because that's what I just said, because the benonit and the ziburit are no longer in her possession, that she could say, go collect from them, because I don't want this takana. Well, she doesn't have them anymore, so she can't claim. So if she were to sell everything but the idit, and then comes anyone who's owed money, basically she will get it. Ava machal idit v'shiur benonit v'ziburit. Now here comes an interesting thing. She sells the best. Okay. Now, if she kept the best in her possession, and comes someone for the Baal Chov, the Baal Chov won't be able to collect from the idit, because she could say, right, I don't want that takana of the rabbis of the last one. But if she sells the idit, does Yael have the rights to say, I don't want that? Right? Not really, because she doesn't have the benonit and the ziburit. All she bought was the idit. So machar idit v'shiur benonit v'ziburit. So Naomi keeps the benonit and the ziburit and sells the idit. Man. Now remember, the idit originally was the one that was sold last. So theoretically, Leah comes, she should go straight to the idit. And Yael doesn't have the rights to say, well, this was in my best interest, because she only bought 1 plot from Naomi. She isn't Naomi who bought all 3. That's only true of someone who buys all 3. So Savar Abai Lememar, so Abai thought to say exactly that. Atukulu gavim idit. Everyone can get from the idit, because that was the last one that was sold from Ruth originally, right? The last one that Ruth sold. So Amalei Rava says, what are you talking about? This is fascinating. Ma machar rishon l'sheni kol zchut shetavo liyado. V'kevan di'ilu ati gavi lokech rishon matze'at v'lehu mi benoni v'ziburit v'av agav d'chizav mi benoni v'ziburit akati idit b'nei chorin havu. Okay, I should really stop here and try to explain the words already, but let's go back to the beginning. He says, when Naomi sold the idit to Yael, she sold it with all the rights that came with it. So if the idit had stayed in the hands of Naomi, even though she bought it last from Ruth, Naomi would be able to say, hey, go collect for my benoni and ziburit, right? The takana of the rabbis to make it from the last one, that was to help people. This isn't helpful to me. Well, since she sold that plot to Yael, Yael can claim, I bought that plot with all the rights that it came with, which means if Leah comes to collect, we're going to send her to the worst property, right, of Naomi, or the middle property, depending on what it is. But don't come collect from my idit, because I bought it with the rights that came along with it, even though I don't have the 3 plots to claim. This isn't in my best interest, but I bought it with whatever rights it came with. So again, she sold it with all the rights it had. Now, here we're going to go through, and this is just a review of everything we said. If it was all still in Naomi's hands, she could make them collect it from the Benoni and the Ziburit. Even though when Naomi bought the two lesser plots, still Ruth had the original Idid in her property, and generally, and therefore that was kind of last in line. And if it was Monday before she had bought the best land, anyone would have collected from Ruth from the best land. Therefore, Naomi could say, though, I don't want this takanav, that whole thing, once I bought this land. And therefore, Yael can say the same thing. That belonged to Naomi. Because she bought it with all the rights that it came with. Okay, so that's an interesting machloket by Rava, right? Once you only have the ED, maybe you can't make this claim anymore. Or do we say, no, if she bought it from Naomi, she bought it with all the rights it came with. Amar Rava. We're going to have two more cases, and then with that, finish the daf. Reuven shemachar kostot hav l'Shimon. V'halach Shimon u'machar sadeh chat l'Levi. Okay, so let's go back to the people we know. Ruth owed money to Leah. Ruth sold all her property to Naomi. Same case as just before. Halach Shimon u'machar sadeh chad l'Levi. Shimon, so that's our Naomi. She sells to Yael. Uba bal chov de Reuven. Now comes the bal chov of Reuven. Ratzami zegove. Reuven can go either to Yael or to Naomi. Either one. Well, let's just see which case. Lo amaran ela dezavin Benoni. That's only if she sold to Yael Benoni land. But if she didn't sell to Yael Benoni land, then no. Because if she sold not the right type of land to Yael, and Yael bought that, Yael can claim. These are all what claims people could claim. I specifically bought the Edid in the Ziburi because I knew she had a loan out, and I knew she'd go collect from, that she's not going to collect from me because I didn't buy the Benoni land exactly to avoid that situation. And even if she bought Benoni, Nami lo amaran ela de lo shiur Benoni te kavate to lo matze amale hinachti lach makom legabe shim. If Naomi had Benoni land and sold some of the Benoni land, but not all of it to Yael, then still Yael could claim, I bought Benoni land, but you know what? I left some Benoni land with Naomi. You go to her first. She was the first one who bought it. I don't collect from me. Aval shiur Benoni te kavate gabe Shimon. If she left by Shimon, lo gavimine, then you can't collect from Yael. Right, if she left with Naomi. Again, she could say, I left you then. Amar Rabbi. Reuven, now we have a totally different thing, and this is actually quite simple. It's a totally different concept. It's with similar situation. Reuven shemachar sadeh l'Shimon ba'achrayut. Now, normally if you sell this land, like Ruth sells land to Naomi, we know there's a loan out. Ruth generally sells it with responsibility. That means that if the land gets seized from Naomi, well, Ruth will have to compensate her for the money that she lost. Okay, that's clear. Unless she sells it without achrayut. Otherwise, the default is it's with a warranty, basically. So now we're a guarantee. So Reuven sells to Shimon, meaning Ruth sells to Naomi with a guarantee. Va'ata bal chov de Reuven, that's Leah. She comes v'tarak mi Shimon and takes it directly from Naomi. That's what we've been talking about all along. Dinahu da azil Reuven u'mishtai dina b'hadei. Let's say Ruth didn't really owe the money. Let's say Ruth already paid back the money. And Leah goes straight to Naomi and takes the field. Now, what does Naomi know about whether Ruth paid back the money or not? She can't make a claim. So Ruth can come in and make a claim, okay? And say, listen, Leah, I pay back the money. What are you bothering Naomi for? And Leah can't say to Ruth, hey, don't butt into my business. This is between me and Naomi. This has nothing to do with you anymore. You sold your land, your lien property. I'm dealing with it with Naomi directly. She can't say that. But why? Because Ruth can say, this affects me. If you take it from Naomi, I'm going to have to pay her back. This assumes one thing, which is, if she didn't have anything to do with it, if she sold to the land without achrayut, then Ruth couldn't make a claim at all. So the Gemara says, Ikad Amri, some people say, what are you talking about? even if Ruth has no interest here, okay, no financial interest, that she won't have to pay the money back because she sold it for a cheap price and Naomi bought it anyway. She took a risk, and the risk was all in Naomi's hands. Still, Ruth could go and make a claim because she could say, listen, if it's true that Naomi's not going to get any money out of me, but she'll be very angry with me. And just because of that, I'm allowed to make a claim. Okay. The first opinion says, no, she can't. And some people actually go as far as to say, this shows that you can't actually hire a lawyer who doesn't have to do with your case, which is a fascinating concept, that you couldn't hire a lawyer because otherwise Ruth could just come and make a claim as her lawyer. Okay. So most people say that's not true. This is a different kind of, we're not talking about her doing it as her lawyer. And maybe they say, maybe this was because Naomi didn't agree to Ruth coming, like Naomi didn't hire her to come. Anyway, that's a whole aside. Anyway, what we had today in the second part of the daf was all sorts of cases of property that was sold in different orders in different situations and who can get from what. And again, it was quite complicated. I'm sorry, it's a long daf for a Friday, but hopefully it's clear. It's the kind of daf that you kind of have to go over more than once to really fully get all the nuances. It's quite challenging. With that, wishing everybody a good Shabbat and hoping for good news.